Alice, I'm very glad to see you.
Yes, likewise, friends. I'm also happy to see you.
Alice, I'd like to start with the blackout in Moscow. These clips were on your Telegram channel. And actually, all the Telegram channels shared that Moscow was without power. And in general, there were powerful strikes on Russia's critical infrastructure. Plus, occupied Crimea is ablaze. How do you assess our strikes? And that's without us even having tomahawks yet.
We have the main thing: beautiful, winged, and pink. Dasha and I, just before we started recording, were talking as friends. Dasha and I were just discussing that. Without planning it, today we're basically dressed in corporate colors. Because yes, Dasha was quoting the successes of our flamingos in Crimea. That's why there's a whole series here. I won't tell you anything, but there will be signs. Here they are, the signs, here come the signs. You know, friends, of course, war is that kind of story where, as Trump says, calling our war a game, he talks about cards, about Trump cards. So this is that game, using his terminology, that can be played by two sides. And now the Russian people will feel this more and more with each passing day. Because as long as the war hasn't come to the aggressor's territory, the aggressor will remain fairly invulnerable. You know, I remember now our first stream with Avik Schuster during the Great War. I don't remember exactly when, but sometime after the start of the full-scale invasion, we went on air with him for the first time. And that's when he voiced this idea for the first time. He said that as long as the war doesn't come to Russian territory, as long as Muscovites and residents of St. Petersburg don't feel it themselves, it will be very hard for us. That is, to win the war, to end it with a just peace, that already means victory. We will only be able to do that then. And of course, he also said, I'll finish quoting him here, that NATO needs to understand that without its involvement, as long as NATO doesn't enter this war, we won't be able to end it. And here too, I absolutely agree with this. The only question is in what form to get involved. Because listen, it's not necessary for NATO to declare war on Russia, especially since Putin has long been saying that he's not fighting Ukraine, he's fighting the entire NATO bloc. Moreover, even when he was just planning the large-scale invasion. Friends, let's remember what was being said on all the Moscow propaganda channels. They were saying that Ukraine doesn't exist, that there's only the aggressive NATO bloc, all these strange alliances that want to attack Russia, and therefore Russia must strike first. And yet they choose Ukraine as the target, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with NATO. It only wanted to join, but so far NATO hasn't accepted it. But by the way, it's so interesting, so amusing that as a result of all this, since Putin told his people he started the war with Ukraine to prevent NATO from expanding, we've ended up with almost 4 years of war. During this time, I think he has really shown himself, because now there are two countries on Russia's borders that are NATO members, and they weren't in NATO before. But now, as a result of this war that he started, they are, of course, a great strategist, in quotation marks. It's important to talk about this, you know? It's important that those who live in Russia also understand and analyze this. Not just what is being poured into their ears, eyes, everywhere, from the central channels, but simply some basic analysis. But the conditions of life will greatly help with this analysis. And so blackouts in Moscow and other Russian cities, the collapse of the sewage system, when there's no water, no heat, no heating, they really, sober people up. They really clear your head and make you start thinking. I hope that's what will happen. Well, and our task, let me repeat, is that Ukraine is not going to, and even those watching us in Russia should understand this, Ukraine is not going to and will not strike civilian targets, will not hit residential buildings, will not strike where there are civilians, because we are not Russians, we are not barbarians. We are talking about war. We are talking exclusively about military targets.
You know, I prepared 3 videos for our stream today. The first video is about Prigozhin.
And there will be blackouts across Russia, first in Belgorod and then in Moscow.
So there is already a blackout in Belgorod, but here's a blackout in Moscow. Alice, just for you.
The power went out in part of the district. The power went out in part of the district.
This is a blackout in Moscow. And now the third video. This is occupied Crimea. A Russian woman says there's no gasoline and she's crying.
This whole situation with gasoline is really getting to me. Can I please cry just a little? My car is right here. It was parked on the floor with zero gasoline. Just to stand in this line. But for some reason there aren't any people there. Just to stand in this line. You know, just to have at least a little gasoline. And I have none at all. Zero. I don't even know how I got here.
Basically, there are a million videos like this, Alice. I'd like to put an end to this.
Listen, it's so interesting to watch Prigozhin now. A prophet, literally, right? Well, of course, Putin didn't appreciate him in his own country, but a prophet. And I think this isn't the first prediction by Prigozhin that has come true. It happens, a thug, a terrorist, it's all clear. But for Russia, he was a very good fit. And from time to time, he said things that were true, which is the most interesting part. Look, here's something about the blackout for you. It's coming. He talked about it, so let's recall his loud statements. This is very important right now. And we're closely watching what has come true and what is very likely to happen soon. He also said that it was Putin who started the war, not for some kind of black or Russian goals, but simply for his own personal reasons, to maintain power, for personal gain, to cover up corruption at the highest levels of Russian authority. In other words, he just didn't mention Putin's name, but essentially he was saying exactly what I'm saying now, just in my own words. And that's a good thing that, look, this will start to become clear soon. Soon everyone will start to realize this. And he was the first to show Russians where the root of the problem lies. His march on Moscow was about that. Back then, acting purely out of his own personal feelings, driven by greed, he was heading for Moscow, but not for the Kremlin, where he really should have gone. But he was heading for... What was he after there? The General Staff, the Ministry of Defense. He wanted to go after the Ministry of Defense. Yes, he wanted to settle scores with those who had deprived him of big money. It was really just a story that could, of course, have led to a complete change of power if he hadn't stopped, if he hadn't believed them, and if he'd had enough courage. Well, he didn't have enough, and as a result, we know how he ended up. But he also said, let me remind you, some other interesting things. Back when no one in Russia was even close to dealing with YouTube, he was the first to say that, well, YouTube in Russia urgently needed to be blocked so people wouldn't watch Gordon and Fagin, quote. So, as we can see, what happened now is that they actually did block YouTube in Russia. Yes, you can still access it, but it's very difficult, and that's done to drown out the voice of truth. In other words, he understood who people were really hearing and listening to, who was actually providing objective information, and he realized how important it was to keep Russians in this informational filth. You see, to keep poisoning them further, to continue. By the way, he also promised us some kind of damning compromat on the top leadership. That's how he put it. And then Vladimir Seshkin, in an interview with me, friends, you can watch it all, it's on YouTube, said that the compromat he was gathering, was personally on Putin and his closest top associates. And what's more, the compromat is supposedly so shocking that even we aren't ready for it, considering that it seems like what else could surprise us? What more could we possibly learn about Putin? What could be the most extreme thing? I'm not sure. Maybe our viewers can speculate in the comments about what could possibly be in that compromat. Because I said Volodya, well, okay, what kind of compromat would actually work, considering the situation in Russia, considering what we now understand about Russians and their information vacuum? And accordingly, whatever story Putin tells, well, not even him, but one of his lapdogs will come out and bark that it's all artificial intelligence, that it's all made up. Still, Asechkin said that Prigozhin's associates, those who managed to escape to the West, saved some or maybe not all of the compromat he had collected. And it was even said that he went as far as writing things down. He was writing things down starting from the moment he had his restaurant, and then when he began catering all those Kremlin, Putin-level banquets, he documented everything. Even the waiters who served these so-called Kremlin demigods, let's call them that, even the waiters had little microphones on them. I mean, we know the classic scenario, right? In many top restaurants, in many countries, especially those with traditions dating back to when the KGB was still active, in restaurants where top politicians, top officials, and top businessmen meet, there are microphones on the tables. And especially, I'm not revealing any big secrets here, I think everyone understands this, but it's still useful to say it out loud, especially in VIP rooms, which are supposed to be the most private, away from prying eyes, where people discuss delicate matters. There are microphones everywhere, and also cameras. And all this footage and audio gets leaked. It's not just that the restaurant management is recording things. No, the management does it on orders from, let's say, friends from above. So in Russia, this is absolutely commonplace, friends. It's everywhere. And of course, many people have been and are being recorded. But with Prigozhin, it was on another level. He had all his waiters equipped with spy gear. So it wasn't just microphones on the tables and so on, probably from several sources. I don't know for sure, but it's definitely interesting, very interesting.
I just can't help but discuss this with you right now. It's clearly a historic event. The Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the leader of the Venezuelan opposition, Maria Corina Machado. And it's a woman, which is really nice since you and I always bring a female perspective. Gender definitely matters. So a woman has won the Nobel Prize somewhere. And, my audience immediately writes to me, somewhere Trump is crying and will soon send us tomahawks very quickly, tomahawks together. Look, here's how Solovyov has already reacted to the tomahawks. Literally just one phrase.
The Tomahawk is not a carrier of nuclear weapons. However, unlike the F-16, which can carry missiles with special warheads, the Tomahawk is already that very missile, the launch of which unequivocally, well, let's put it this way, sharply increases the likelihood. I mean, how can we know in some situation due to a number of factors?
So basically, the Cuban Missile Crisis, nuclear war, let's discuss both the Nobel Prize and the Tomahawk, and of course the reaction as well.
Well, look, first of all, it was to be expected, friends. What did you expect?
Zhenya, it was to be expected that he didn't get it. Let's put it that way.
It was to be expected that he didn't get it because, in fact, it was stated quite openly to Donald Trump by the Norwegian leadership, and by the way, this happened during a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, and in general by many experts, that the keys to the Nobel Peace Prize for Donald Trump are on President Zelensky's desk. As soon as Donald Trump resolves the issue of the war, achieves a just peace for Ukraine, not at Ukraine's expense, not by surrendering its interests, not by capitulating Ukraine, then immediately the Nobel Committee is ready to award him the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm not discussing right now whether this is fair or not, whether it's connected or not, although in my opinion it is very fair, because this is the biggest war currently happening in Europe, in fact in the world, that Russia is waging against Ukraine. And of course, if Donald Trump helps us with this, then as I said, we will all be writing letters, making phone calls, shouting, standing with signs, please anything at all so that he is awarded the Nobel Prize. He truly deserves it. In this regard, he really is doing a great job. And now, since as far as the war goes, we are still facing attacks on our energy infrastructure near the Verkhovna Rada, they brought in bio-toilets and water because the shelling has been terrible. Russia is raging, trying to inflict as much damage as possible, especially before winter. Another point, as I repeat, is that this is now a game for two. And now we are about to witness a very interesting event, which we don't even want to announce yet, but we will discuss them as they happen, nevertheless. So it's clear that at the moment there is no sign of peace in Ukraine. On the contrary, things are escalating. And of course, we are really counting on Donald Trump to take a number of steps, and he has already started making the right statements. Right now, we are counting on these steps. Yes, about the tomahawks. which seemed absolutely unthinkable, even just talking about tomahawks, for example, at the beginning of the large-scale invasion. Yeah, well, let's remember. No, even more so. Everyone compares Trump and Biden. Let's do that now as well. Even under Biden's administration, who supported Ukraine and helped Ukraine, though there were huge questions, and we know we've discussed all this on air with you. But under him, there was no talk of tomahawks at all. Moreover, it's not just talk, but actual decisions. Now, we hope that we're already close to that. What's more, there's insider information. We won't reveal it right now, but we're counting on it. Our missile production. It's not for nothing that we started with those beautiful flamingo birds. But it's effective and good in every sense. You see? So, what are we talking about here? The point is, this decision is clear in principle. It should motivate Donald Trump to remind him that next year, in October, the Nobel Peace Prize will be awarded again. And if he helps us, that Nobel Peace Prize could be his. If you truly think about it, look closely, he really did make his significant contribution to having substantially fewer wars and promoting much more peace on this entire planet. I won't go too far, let's just take a very recent and relevant event. Of course, yes, that's absolutely right. Well, I just genuinely applaud him for his efforts. I really hope that it was truly him who ended this war and that this will mark the beginning of a lasting peace, that everything will go as it should, because I understand what levers are involved there, what money is at stake, what commitments have been made, who is participating, and who is acting as intermediaries. And all of this, well, it's impressive. It's impressive because only he was able to do it. You see, I'm already speaking as if it's a done deal, because I hope that Israel has already gone down this path and now has stepped onto the solid ground of this peace, you know? I really like this. I really like this, and I'm very happy for Israel. It's so inspiring for us as well, because we see that, well, Trump, when he wants to, he takes action. He gets things done. Does he want to help or not? Does he want to end Russia's war against Ukraine and bring peace? Yes, absolutely. I have no doubts at all. 100%. Does he want to help Ukraine? Specifically Ukraine. Most likely, yes. From what we even know, it's more likely yes than no. And I believe that in the end, you and I are not changing this prediction. In the end, Trump and I are walking the same path. We have no other road with him. And he is on this road, and this is the road to peace, to a just peace. And he is on the path along this road. Now he is already starting to make decisions, and has already made some in order to bring about a turning point in the war, and accordingly to bring about peace. Let's not discuss any dates right now, because we can't say anything. No one knows this.
If Kitkaloch was confident, you see, if the administration in general was inclined toward Trump, there was confidence. What can we even say now? If Trump invited Putin to Alaska and was sure of something, as you understand, he must have been sure of something when he invited him. Most likely, Witka said something to himself, and then as a result, Trump stopped being confident and said, by the way, what do you think? This is a very important point. Trump didn't congratulate Putin on his birthday. Do you think that's a serious signal?
Well, of course. These are all the signs that not only the whole world reads, but that Putin understands very well. And it shows that he went too far. Trump's patience is running out. And Trump is not as much of a simpleton as Putin wanted to portray him. You understand, right? Look, in Russia, they created an entire institute, a whole structure dedicated to studying one specific person, Donald Trump. To study his psychological type, his behavior, his habits, his preferences, what triggers his emotions, what he reacts to, whom he sympathizes with, how he can be offended, how he can be, so to speak, captivated or emotionally taken prisoner. People are working on this. Again, this is open information. They've been working on it since Trump's first presidential term. In St. Petersburg, there's an entire department which has now grown into a large structure, and they submit huge multi-page reports to Putin detailing what to latch onto, how to behave. And Putin was confident that he would outplay Trump, that he would exploit all his weaknesses and strengths, and that he would twist Trump around his finger like a gypsy with the sun, as it seems to me, for a very long time, all while continuing to destroy Ukraine, continuing his dark work on the front lines. But first of all, Putin underestimated Trump, I think, absolutely. But, that's also just how it is. Let's look at the biography of the man. A very remarkable person, a very brave person. Only someone like that could reach the point Trump has and behave the way he does now. But Putin also underestimated the role of the world, the role of Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine, the role of the Ukrainian army, and the role of our Western allies and partners who, yes, traditionally could only express concern or very deep concern, but at some point everything changes. Everything always changes, This story, this old tune can't play forever. And when Russian drones started flying over European cities, that's when the Europeans got nervous and they realized that right now, with Ukraine's hands and at a relatively low cost, they can resolve the issue of their own security, because all of this is essentially a declaration of war against every country. And right now, if the Europeans don't give us weapons, don't give us money, if they don't really step up and get involved, then tomorrow they'll have to fight themselves. They'll have to mobilize their own armies, and their citizens will have to die on the battlefield against Russia. And now their task is to avoid that, you understand. And now everyone has realized this.
The main question, just pay attention to this, is that President Zelensky recently gave an interview and said that thanks to Ukrainian strikes, Russia's state fuel company is facing a gasoline shortage of up to 20%. Then statistics appeared showing that we have destroyed 40% of Russia's oil refinery capacity. After that, a figure came out. The Russian oil refining industry has lost $100 billion. Then information emerged that Russia is currently importing gasoline from Belarus and petroleum products from China. But when I talk to economists, even Evgeny Chichvarkin reacted very sharply to this. He says that none of this really matters at all. He reacted so strongly that I asked, well, what do you think? Why is that? He says, no, this is all very minor for Russia. It doesn't matter. And I want to discuss with you whether this is really insignificant for the Putin regime, for the Kremlin, for Moscow. Is it really trivial and unimportant, as, for example, Chichvarkin thinks?
No, I have a different opinion. I believe that everything matters. And the method of 1,000 cuts has not been cancelled. Even if a cut is small, if there are 100, 200, or 2,000 of them, the victim will die from blood loss. Although it would seem if there is only one, it is completely insignificant and doesn't matter at all. But in this case, we're not talking about the victim, but about the aggressor. In other words, about how to defeat him. So I believe that the story with the oil refineries, with the gasoline shortage, is not even a small cut. It's a serious blows, a significant loss of blood for Russia. And we absolutely need to continue, and we will continue in the same spirit. And this will go on in parallel with other operations, in parallel with other strikes that Putin will receive. And he will definitely receive them. Because, when mass panic truly starts to spread among the general population, and we are already clearly seeing significant signs of this developing. But look, this particular generation that is currently standing in long lines for essential gasoline, they mostly possess their own cars, they utilize them quite frequently and consistently, and for the most significant part, they genuinely do not really remember the difficult Soviet-era lines, when there was a total and absolute shortage of practically everything. A severe deficit of goods, because for those specific people whom Vladimir Putin actually heavily relies upon, this situation is completely and utterly natural, of course, and entirely expected. Because they had nothing in their youth, everything was taken away from them in their adulthood. And now in their old age, there's no one to care for them. So nothing really changes in their lives. They've spent their whole lives in the Soviet Union, it just had a different name. But it's the same prison of nations, as they used to say, and that's what it really is. But under Putin, more than one generation has already grown up. And these people, they're not really used to this. Specifically those who use a car, an automobile for something. Plus, let's not forget, the main thing is logistics. Look, not even private individuals. Logistics, what does it mean when there's no gasoline? No gasoline means no gasoline, no way to respond to a call, no ambulance. These are people who die because doctors can't reach them. No gasoline means no logistics to deliver medicine to the pharmacy. So these are also deaths simply because the pharmacy doesn't have the most basic things. No gasoline means the firefighters can't work, they won't come and put out the fire. People will burn in fires. No gasoline means food can't be delivered to stores. All of this is because there is no gasoline, you see? That's why it creates a very strong background. It puts pressure both on the economy and on public morale. I believe this is one of the most effective methods.
I agree with you 200%, 200%. Alice, let me wrap up our discussion for today. Of course, I can't help but discuss, as the week's conclusion, Putin's birthday, especially with whom and how he celebrated it. You see, it's a phenomenon. So everyone wrote that Putin celebrated his birthday among the military and in the Tsar's mausoleum. Those are the two important points. Not with Alina Kabeva, not with his children, not with his grandchildren, you see? With the military, where they all ate in a mournful atmosphere. He just sat there silent while they ate. Apparently, they didn't clink glasses there because you don't do that for the dead. And after that, the Tsar's mausoleum, so his 73rd birthday. They wrote that in the Peter and Paul Cathedral, there was a parade of helmets and epaulets. The bloody one's birthday, the formation prays, the priest swings the censer. The Kremlin pool films it, the killers nod. The altar instead of a tribunal, icons in place of a verdict like passes to the next war. This is today's parade, the service staff of war. Let's discuss this.
Yes, I saw that. I don't know, maybe he was just picking out a tomb for himself as a gift for the future. The only question is, how near in the future? But it's obvious he was there with a purpose.
I thought so too, because this is a preparatory process. Solovyov keeps talking about the refrigerator, but here we have a tomb.
Maybe it's refrigerated too. I don't know, maybe they put something in there for him to put him to sleep. Do you understand what I mean? In fact, if you take a truly fresh and objective look and carefully observe what the current Russian state truly is today, you will quickly realize that it is basically a completely fake state. Precisely the kind described in various profound utopian and deeply unsettling dystopian books, which, when they were originally written, seemed very much like pure science fiction. And today's Russia has reached this phantasmagoria, because everything that happens there is just pure nonsense. It's this fusion of priests in FSB uniforms. In other words, it's the security services, the army, and the church, things that are basically incompatible, who are running the whole process in Russia today. Moreover, it's absolutely true. They talk a lot, and the more they talk about something, the less of it there actually is in their lives. They talk a lot about traditional values, about family, about children, and so on. At the same time, Putin, who is always saying that he's married to Russia, never shows his children. I mean, what other president in the world doesn't show his children? How is that even possible? He gives them fake last names, he plays some kind of spy games, he doesn't show his wife. You see, it's all just very strange. Why is that? So the more they talk about traditional values, all on screen, all their so-called people's representatives, officials, or senators, the more gays there are among them. So in the morning, they go on national TV channels and talk about how gay propaganda should be banned and how gays should be eradicated and beaten all over their bodies. But in the evening, they go to gay clubs and do exactly all the things they've supposedly banned. They foam at the mouth, insisting that it's very trendy and cool to live by their own traditional laws, and that the Russian world is all about pure made-in-Russia Boss shoes and kokoshniks, and that you should only use your own things like those Lada Kalina cars. And what's the name of that phone again? I forgot. The one they actually copied from China. But at the same time, they themselves wear Western brands, Italian, French, Gucci, Armani, Dolce & Gabbana. They drive German cars, you see, and their children don't dream of studying at Moscow State University, but rather dream of studying somewhere like the Sorbonne and Harvard and so on in the best places in the world. These are their double standards. This is what the state is made of. And on Putin's birthday, I remembered, actually, I didn't get a reminder. I remembered that I did an interview with Vladimir Voinovich. In 2017, we recorded a very interesting interview with him. It's on YouTube. You can watch it, friends. I consider it, well, a great joy to talk to such a person. He's a genius, like a great writer, a great prophet. I've loved his Moscow 2042 since school. I mean, he's written a lot of interesting things, but Moscow 2042 was my favorite novel of his. And I always laughed so much. But here, really, I think all our viewers who have read it, they remember that description. It was genuinely funny, so biting. He wrote it in 1986, I remind you. I was 2 years old when he wrote it, but it's coming true right now, the whole book. It's a fantastic novel, not a documentary, but it's becoming a documentary. It has become a documentary before our eyes. So in 2020, 2024, 2025, his book has become reality. And now you read it and you just realize, well, how could he have foreseen this, and what the state has turned into, what role people play there? They're just slaves. I wish, since you mentioned his birthday, I wish all Russians his birthday, because what we wish him is obvious. By the way, we had a kind of flash mob in the comments. Our viewers left him wishes. You can go and read them.
A live broadcast with Dmitry Ilyich on that day, if I'm not rushing you, right?
Yes. So everything there is just as deserved, right? So I wish for Russians, read this book by Voinovich. Just maybe it will open someone's eyes. Maybe someone will finally get it. And for those who have already read it, just read it again. Maybe you've forgotten, like right now, you realize that you're living in that book, but it's such a dystopia, such a mess. It's a nightmare, and it's happening. And it's happening because of your regime and your leadership. You understand? This is actually very important, because when people say that nothing depends on an individual person, that's just not true. The role of the individual in history has never been cancelled, and everything depends on each specific person. And when there are more and more of these people, and then there are a lot of them, everything changes and a new page in history is turned.
Yes, and I just want to add as a final thought that the Nobel Peace Prize, as of today, was awarded to a woman who is fighting against a dictatorial regime who has been fighting for many decades. This is what she does, right? And this is very important. And she received the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, for fighting against a dictatorial regime. And of course, we are all eagerly awaiting the day when the dictatorial regime in Russia will be overturned, when it will fragment into a huge number of small states, and this country will cease to exist as it is now. Friends, please like this video. Alice and I meet every week at the end of the weekend to discuss the key military and political events, and we always try to look at everything with a bright, positive, and optimistic outlook, because the armed forces of Ukraine are our greatest pride, and Ukraine will definitely win, but it will take time. Alisa Basman, Alisa, thank you so much, and see you next week.
Thank you, Dasha. Thank you, friends, and see you soon.